If you look around, you'll see the world can be pretty smart. Okay, very smart. At Capella University, we think education should be smart too. That's why we're reshaping online learning with our FlexPath format. You can set your own deadlines, take classes at your own pace, even leverage your previous experience to move faster. So when it comes to earning your bachelor's degree, you know what kind of choice to make. A smart one. Visit capella.edu to learn more. Capella University. Don't just learn smarter.
Hey guys, welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Line Formula One podcast. Kunal, we're 2 races into the 2019 season and we've had just such an unusual start to this season.
I know, right? And when you think of unusual, the first 2 names that come to my mind are Sebastian Vettel and Lewis Hamilton, because both the superstars haven't had the start to the season that they would have actually hoped for. And can you imagine, had Charles Leclerc won in Bahrain, the opening 2 races of the 2019 Formula One season would have been won by the 2 number 2 drivers of Ferrari and Mercedes. That's how unusual the start to this season has been.
Kunal, are you calling Leclerc the number 2 Ferrari driver?
Well, no, and I'm not saying that Bottas is the number 2 driver either.
Good save. But, honestly, you do have a point because Hamilton got pole in Australia, but he was beaten at the start. And in Bahrain, he lost out at the start again. He was put on this train strategy. And he obviously only won the race because of Leclerc's problems.
And I tell you this, it feels like it is 2018 all over again. Lewis Hamilton being the lucky driver, and of course by lucky, I certainly don't mean that he's not driving hard enough or anything of that sort. All I mean is that he was there to snatch victory when it came his way.
And it's 2018 all over again for Sebastian Vettel. Kunal, he's back to his spinning ways. And you know what was so embarrassing about Bahrain was that he spun without any contact whatsoever.
Yes, and I think that was an absolute rookie mistake from our quadruple world champion. I know he's made these mistakes several times over, but in Bahrain, I just think that he tried putting more power into his rear wheels or rear tires than what they could actually handle.
So guys, in this week's episode of the Inside Line Formula One podcast, there's so much to look forward to. We are going to summarize the most unusual, the most surprising, the most unpredictable moments of the 2019 season. And guys, there are already several of them.
Yes, because that's what we felt after, the checkered flag dropped in Bahrain, that we've had a very unusual start. But that's not all. We are also going to talk about Fernando Alonso, his test in McLaren. Of course, if he could be racing in the Bathurst 1000 next, just because he's racing everywhere he can.
And if Ferrari should already start favouring Leclerc over Sebastian Vettel.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, remember to subscribe to us on iTunes and on Audio Boom to hear your weekly dose of Formula One humor. But we are also listed or featured on Castbox FM. So, if you guys listen to us on Castbox FM, you will find us featured out there. So thank you very much yet again for your support and listens.
Thanks, guys. But back to what we were talking about, why 2019 has been such an unusual season. But Kunal, I'll tell you what's not unusual first. Mercedes is back-to-back 1-2 finishes. In Bahrain, I remembered the classic quote, to finish first, you first have to finish.
Yes, that's true. And, can you believe it? Like, 2 races, one of which, at least in Australia, Mercedes was like the class of the field. But in Bahrain, they were far from being the class of the field, but they still managed to win. Goes back to how we've seen them do this time and again before. But I'll tell you what wasn't unusual for me. It wasn't unusual for me to see Daniel Ricciardo retire from a Formula One race thanks to issues with his Renault power unit. And it was, although, unusual to see Renault put Daniel Ricciardo on a strategy where he was required to overtake the midfield drivers twice.
Twice.
It almost seemed like Renault was testing Ricciardo and asking him to prove his overtaking talent yet again.
By the way, it was unusual to see Ricciardo leading the race.
Yes, that happened, yes.
Yeah, in only his second race with Renault, Ricciardo actually led the race, although, Kunal, it was only for one lap. But what the hell?
One lap.
One glorious lap.
And on that overtaking thing, the only driver, Daniel Ricciardo, had sort of a dirty overtake on, or, ended up touching, was his teammate, Nico Hülkenberg. And that was seriously funny.
By the way, it was very, very, very unusual to see Hülkenberg and Ricciardo retire. Same corner, the same lap. And Kunal, that is some statement from Renault, to prove that they treat both their drivers equally.
And more than anyone else, I actually feel for Nico Hülkenberg, because he was running to be the best of the rest when his Renault power unit actually blew up. And he actually started all the way back in the bottom 5 because he was eliminated in Q1. But also, guys, please remember, if Nico Hülkenberg receives lesser coverage in the second season of the Netflix F1 documentary, it was because of his microphone throwing act at the Bahrain Grand Prix.
Kunal, have you heard any confirmation about Ferrari and Mercedes, whether they'd participate in the documentary this year?
Well, I really hope that they don't, because they're ruining the Formula One show, and I wouldn't want them to ruin another Formula One show.
Yeah, but honestly, for all you know, they'll agree to star in the show only if they get like 50% of combined coverage more than anyone else, and extra coverage for historical bonus or whatever. I don't know.
They always want a competitive advantage, or an unfair competitive advantage, as we'd call it. But even with this whole new management and new team approach to media and all of that, Ferrari screwed up Sebastian Vettel's Q2 qualifying session. He was sent out in traffic and he busted an extra set of soft tires. And I seriously wonder if Sebastian Vettel is now getting the Kimi Raikkonen treatment in Ferrari, and whether Charles Leclerc is getting the Sebastian Vettel treatment in Ferrari. Although the last 2 years, probably all the drivers have got a Kimi Raikkonen treatment. There hasn't been, the sharp treatment that we saw back in the days of Michael Schumacher.
Yeah, Kunal, so much for Vettel wanting to emulate Michael Schumacher at Ferrari. He's still got a long way to go. By the way, McLaren had a double Q3 entry. I was amazed, I was surprised, I was happy. And then Lando Norris got the best of the rest result. I would definitely classify this as an unusual result, happily so.
Even more so, given that Norris was, driving the only car with a sole surviving Renault power unit. And talking of Norris, his teammate Carlos Sainz Jr., he had a clash with Verstappen. Now, there was something definitely not unusual about that, or it was very usual. It was very typically Max Verstappen.
But what was not unusual was Max Verstappen's post-race spin. Kunal, he must have thought to himself, like, okay, I've had an unusually clean race. Let me at least have, some spinning post-race and give Vettel some company.
And not unusual in Bahrain, at least in qualifying, was when the rookies out-qualified their veteran teammates yet again. And it's so much fun to see all these young drivers come and beat their not-so-young teammates especially.
But as usual, Haas did not score points. Because, Kunal, you know how it is for them. One good race, one bad race. So we basically know how it's going to be for them in China. It's going to be good.
Yes, so Formula One's 1000th race. And now that's some benchmark. But that's what it's going to be at the 2019 Chinese Grand Prix. And boy, it makes Formula One sound like a really, really old sport.
An old sport for old Rolex-wearing men. I'm just kidding,
80-year-old Rolex.
We're not old.
Well, to celebrate the sport's 1000th race, on the Inside Line F1 podcast, we are going to have a feature for you next week. In the week leading up to the 1000th race, I should stop saying that, but anyway, we will have 2 episodes for you. The first one is a feature with a famous Formula One freelance photographer, Kim Illman. Kim is from Australia, and he talks to us about his experiences of working as a photographer in the Formula One paddock. He also shares his tips on how to get better at clicking Formula One cars and drivers in action. So for all you eager, trigger-happy listeners, if you're eager on knowing what the life and career of a Formula One photographer is, remember to tune in. And even more so, if you're eager on pursuing a career as a Formula One photographer.
And of course, we'll also have our second episode, which will be our regular pre-race episode. Guys, we look forward to China, the usual paddock stories, and the What Wolf Said This Week section, lest we forget. So lots to look forward to. And Kunal, since we're talking about photographers, I just remembered reading Hamilton's comments on Instagram. This comment was about a photograph shared by the official F1 handle. And Hamilton said that from the previous eras, he missed the great sounding F1 engines.
Yes, now officially, we make no comments on that. And not on Instagram, not even on our podcast, because we've had this Formula One engine sounds discussion way too many times. So it's just time to give up. But hats off to both Lewis Hamilton and Sebastian Vettel for cheering Charles Leclerc in Bahrain, especially post-race. Everyone was very philosophical and offering support and telling Charles how he is destined for a great career and all of that.
Yeah, I thought it was very cute. But Jacques Villeneuve feels that Hamilton didn't actually mean what he said about Leclerc.
Well, I really hope that Villeneuve still hasn't meant what he said about Robert Kubica. But I did some digging around and I realized that the reason why Villeneuve is speaking shit about Robert Kubica is because back in 2016, it was Kubica who replaced Villeneuve at BMW Sauber.
Burn! Good digging, Kunal.
Well, but Kubica said after Bahrain that he is a passenger in the Williams F1 car till such time improvements are made. Now I wonder how in a single-seater racing car, the person sitting behind the driver's seat can call himself a passenger. Okay? I mean, I know a passenger is commonly the term used when someone aquaplanes off the circuit or something like that. But from what I remember, Australia and Bahrain were both dry races. But keeping all the technicalities aside, if what Kubica said about don't mind being the passenger, if that's the kind of passenger that he gets to be, I wouldn't mind being one because it does seem like a lot of fun.
Yeah, Williams were running short of spares in Bahrain and the drivers were told to be cautious. Well, Kunal, I'm just sure that the team was super glad that a certain Lance Stroll has left their team.
And I'm sure that they were very happy that I wasn't being a passenger in one of their cars
Very
in Bahrain
happy.
as well. But on Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez made a statement before Bahrain that Stroll's race pace is seemingly better than Nico Hülkenberg or Esteban Ocon. Now, can you believe it? In just one race, Perez made this statement. Or maybe he was asked to make the statement. We will actually never know.
We'll never know because from being paid to drive, is Perez also being paid to say good things about Stroll?
Well, let's remember he was also a driver who paid to drive. So a lot of those paid driver talks here.
By the way, I was also surprised to read that Romain Grosjean is one of France's highest paid sportsmen, apparently in the region of 5.5 million euros. Unbelievable.
No comments, really. The only comment actually I can make is if Romain scores points more regularly, I'm sure that he will certainly earn a lot more. But I must say that he does have this knack of putting himself in a tough spot at least once every Grand Prix weekend.
Or that he doesn't need to score points more regularly because he anyway earns so much. But since we're talking of earnings, Lewis Hamilton's career earnings are at around $500 million.
Wow.
This was some list released by Forbes, like crazy.
The surprising name in that list was that of Ralf Schumacher. He's made around $120 million if I remember right.
Good for him.
Yes. Okay, finally, two key topics to talk about. Fernando Alonso's test in McLaren and of course, should Ferrari favour Charles Leclerc over Sebastian Vettel already? Now, on Alonso, he said that the 2019 McLaren car is good, but it isn't good enough to tempt him to come back to Formula One. And that he would return to the sport only if an opportunity with a world championship winning team came by.
Basically, Alonso believes that if the McLaren car is a Formula 1.5 spec, a Formula 2 driver, Norris, is more suited to drive it while Alonso waits for an opportunity in Formula 1.
But for now, I wonder if Alonso could race in the Bathurst 1000. It's a race in the Australian V8 Supercar Series. And I know that Zach Brown owns a minority stake in a team out there. So Fernando Alonso, go have all your fun down under as well.
And finally, Kunal, the most burning question, I would say, of this podcast. Should Ferrari favour Leclerc over Vettel? What do you think?
Well, honestly, the start to 2019 makes fans believe that Ferrari should make the switch in preference of drivers, especially, in if you remember back in Australia, Leclerc was ordered to stay behind Vettel, and in Bahrain, he denied a similar team order.
I know, that was so badass.
Yes, but it's, in my view, still early days. Leclerc has shown pace and promise, but Vettel's experience against Hamilton might just come handy. Now, I know this is exactly where lots of our listeners will cite all of Vettel's mistakes, literally back from 2017.
Yeah, he spun in somewhat 4 out of the last 10 races. And Leclerc's pace, form and maturity does put Ferrari in a spot, I would agree. Because, let's remember, not all prodigal drivers have both pace and maturity, and maybe Leclerc is an exception.
Well, I know that underhanded statement was targeted towards someone else. But anyway, let's see how Ferrari handle this, because I think publicly they will offer support to Vettel, but in the race they will offer neutral status to both their drivers, especially over the next few races, like any team would, and then see which way the wind actually blows in 2019. And it would be something if Charles Leclerc maintains this advantage over Vettel through the entire season.
Yeah, Vettel's anyway made a statement that he's not sure of Formula One after 2020 and would wait before commenting. But guys, this statement was actually made before the Bahrain Grand Prix, so let's not overreact.
Basically, she means, let's just wait before commenting.
Wait and watch.
Yes, and finally, I must say that the midfield of Formula One reminds me of the intense racing that takes place in Formula E. Basically, there's positions changing every other corner.
Yeah, Hülkenberg actually labeled the opening lap of Bahrain as a war zone.
And he actually had a fantastic opening lap from what I remember. He went from being in the bottom 5 to running in the points. And I also saw a few driver onboard cameras, and there were literally so many sparks flying from the cars. It felt like the drivers were in the middle of artillery fire, and I'm not kidding.
Yeah, in fact, Alexander Albon said that he felt like he had fire on his face.
Well,
very,
there you
very
go.
dramatic. Okay, guys, closing notes coming up. So Ross Brawn said that the 2021 regulations are close to being signed off, but the financial regulations might not be signed off. So, I don't know. That's a positive, negative, positive statement from Ross Brawn. I am confused.
Well, I think for Formula One to be competitive and for Formula One to attract new teams, financial equality would be extremely crucial.
Yeah, and Ross Brawn said that the 2021 agreements is very close and they will be signed before the deadline. But Christian Horner believes that they will miss the deadline.
Who do we believe?
The optimist or the pessimist, I don't know.
Well, I fear for what will happen in case Formula One does end up missing the June deadline. Although I do hear that Ferrari might still retain the right to veto the technical rule changes in the sport even after 2021. But again, let's wait for all official statements before commenting.
And finally, for all of you following the Indian Premier League, the IPL, if you see the Kings 11 Punjab Australian cricketer Andrew Tye doing the shui after a cricket match, guys, you should know that he's borrowed this idea from none other than Daniel Ricciardo.
Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you twice next week. Adios.
Ta-da!
Progressive presents an interview with your upstairs neighbor.
Hi, I'm Tia. The upstairs-downstairs neighbor dynamic is so special. We have our own language. Like when I scream at my mom on the phone, the people downstairs bang on the ceiling to show their support. The nighttime's the best time to rearrange furniture. I call it midnight feng shui. And if I sleep through my alarm in the morning, they bang on my door to wake me. So thoughtful.
Progressive can't save you from your upstairs neighbor, but we can save you money when you bundle renters and auto insurance with us. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates and other insurers. Bundle discount not available in all states or situations.